So this is our expanded panel for this afternoon. So we've got Jamie, Linda, John, Marcus, David, myself, and Liz. So we have a question here. Yes.
Hi. Firstly, thank you to every single person involved in all of the speakers today. It was just absolutely beautiful and really informative. I suppose my question is, and I'm not exactly sure who to direct it to, but probably to the Biennale group. Oh, yep. It's predominantly around the question of the impact of art and how it feeds into creation, I suppose, but also not overusing of resources when making art, for example. And I'm particularly loving the concept that of the weaving and the rugs using the recycled clothing. And as a painter or as an architect, how do you think about the sustainability of what you're doing?
Louise, that might be a question for you. Oh, she's not here. Who would like to address that question?
Well, I guess I might start and then some others will contribute. I guess measuring the impact of art is an interesting question. I had a go at it a few years ago with some research where we had some big case study events, and there's been quite a lot done overseas, where particularly in the community health area, of measuring the effect of the arts on community health. And so I tried to apply some of those sorts of principles to, I'll use the example of a large musical, what I call a celebrationist event. So it incorporated lots of different art forms, and music and performance, dance, acting and visual arts as well. They were all incorporated in this huge performance. There's an oratorio that was written by Ralph Steadman in England, and he illustrated it, and Richard Harvey did the music for it. And you can imagine a bit like Handel's Messiah, I guess, except it had a very strong ecological theme. And we assessed it through questionnaires, asked people how they responded to the work, what effect it had on them. And by and large, 60–70% of people said it moved their, well, actually it was more than that, 90% of people said it moved their emotions. So they were moved by the work. It's a very powerful performance. We performed it at the Woodford Folk Festival to about 10,000 people. So there was a lot of people saw it. So you could sort of, I suppose you can assess artwork by audience numbers. It's often done, the number of people who experience the event. But also when we went deeper, did it move their emotions? Did it make them think about their relationship with the environment? Did it make them reassess, or did they learn things? There was, the majority of people said, yes, it did, all those things. One of probably the most significant question we asked people was, did it make them want to change their behaviour towards the environment? So that was the key thing, did it lead to people adopting pro-environmental behaviour? And I think it was about 2/3 of the people said yes or a bit, so there was not a lot of people that said no. That's good, that was a win. I mean, it was a one-off event, and you could say, well, what was the enduring effect of that? And that's one of the big problems of assessing or evaluating the effect of art too, is trying to get a handle on the long-term effects years later. But I might hand over to one of the other people who are on the panel.
I'll just comment on that, because while we've set a context here about affecting behavioural change among people who might be engaged in negative activities, it may well be difficult to measure. Well, it can be anticipated that the behavioural change of people who are already interested in that sort of art activity or that sort of environmental art activity are those who are already somewhat tuned into this stuff, and so their behaviour may not need to change quite as much as other people's behaviour. So Yeah, it's a very interesting question, because we need to remember it's not just about entertaining those who are already converted or making them feel better. In many ways, we need to respond to the challenge of communicating to people for whom this is a new idea. Does anybody who's online want to comment on that theme or question? Okay.
What was the second part of your, can I just ask, what was the second part of your question? I just couldn't remember.
So one thing that really, really interests me is how to address sustainability as a whole. And so if I think about many different types of art, especially large scale installations or even architecture, what goes into making of this art and where does it come from? If everybody was to paint a painting, where does the paint come from? And I love the concept of making art out of recycled materials, addressing, you know, and educating and promoting in a beautiful way through art, but also doing it with things that we already have that might be wasteful. And I guess it's more a statement that that's amazing, but how are different groups looking at that?
Can I? I'm with put together an organisation called Eco Arts Australis. We've run a few conferences in the last few years about using art to shape environmental behaviour or influence pro-environmental behaviour in some way or another. And it's quite, when I say artists, I also mean performers and musicians and so on, are often working out collaboratively, so much more than perhaps in the past. So rather than a single artist, I mean, a lot of artists still work like that just by themselves, but increasingly artists are working collaboratively and with communities, different community groups. And I think that's a really interesting development that's taking place. It's in the community arts area.
Maybe we could ask Marcus about that, the community participation side of art in New Zealand.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess I'm not quite as clued in on the grander art scale as some of our other talks are about today. One thing I was thinking of though, when you're talking about the sustainability of it, is one really important thing to us when we're engaging with Indigenous communities and working in our wild communities with our kaumātua, is that any materials we take in any form, whether or not that's plant samples to create the artwork based on, or even recordings of interviews, we take those back to the place where we got them. So we take all the plant material gathered back to the sites and we give it to the kaumātua, or whoever is the kaitiaki or the guardian of that area, and they can do with it what they will. If they distribute it back through the forest, if they use it for whatever other purpose. And the same with, has become more of a practice as with sort of technologies evolved to take back recordings. So if I know Te Papa, our National Art Gallery, does it now as well, where they'll often have art displays on where they talk about, they might just have audio clips of people interviewed from the Second World War, or asked about different forms of colonization pressures, like we had dawn raids and things like that. They always take the recordings back to the people they got them from. And I guess that kind of plays into the same sort of sustainability and where our resources go back to.
That's like restoration, isn't it? If you dig a hole, you know, take something out, you really should put something back. You should fill that hole up again, shouldn't you? Hey? Anyway, guys, I think this is a nice place to end this session, which has been a real eye-opener for me. And what I'd like to do is draw people's attention to the network that David is working with. I know other artists here have as well. So we might actually keep in touch with each other by email and maybe set up some sort of way of discussing and keeping this conversation going, because it's obviously an area of great potential. And David's also brought along some material here if you want to have a look at his publications of recent years. So with that, I thank all the presenters very much for their contribution. It's been profoundly interesting for me. I've really enjoyed every minute of it. And we look forward to an edited audio-visual recording that will be made available to registrants in the future. So thank you all very much, audience and panelists.